Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we've got another Pictures Worth 1,000 Words video. This time we're doing an entire photo album that was donated to us, and not just a single picture, and it's a museum-era photo album. And Mr. Hoban, who's been a long-time volunteer with the museum, started back in 2000 or 2001, donated the collection of photographs mostly from those early days. So we're going to jump through it real quick, talk about some of the restoration work that was done early on before the ship was even open to the public. So there's some cool stuff in here, and there's a lot of stuff where there's several pictures of volunteer get-togethers and whatnot. We'll flip through those real quick. But the museum does not just collect objects from the ship's wartime history. We also collect museum-era photographs, oral histories, things like that, because it tells us a lot of stuff about changes that have been made to the ship since she was turned into a museum, and this historically significant fifth commissioning period, as we call it. So we've got World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the 1980s, and then the museum era are the 5 periods of this ship's life that the museum interprets. So, this photo series starts off with a couple of stern shots of the ship being towed up the Delaware. Got 2 pictures of the ship's stern, then we've got one of the ship's bow, and you can see that she's pretty rusted, pretty faded. Ooh, if we zoom in on this one, you can see that the bridge windows are still plated over from her being in mothballs. The guns are all at 0 degrees elevation. Radar antenna isn't on there. In fact, none of the antennas for the directors are on there. So that's a pretty interesting picture. Next. In the following picture is the same one, just from a little bit greater distance. You can actually see a tugboat pulling her now. You can see some of the other vessels that are escorting the ship up the river. It was a huge news day to get the when the ship came up here, so lots of people came out to watch. The next picture we have is an early event when the ship was open up, just the main deck at this point. Looks like some painting work has been done. You can tell that the deck's already in bad shape at this point. The guns have been elevated to 15 degrees. You can see that big poster for the Mega Millions. If I'm not mistaken, some of the funding for opening the battleship up came out of the lottery revenue, which is why I think the early museum was required to have that poster up for events. Next picture is more of the same. Next picture, you can see the Camden area around us. That all looks very similar to how it is today. The gangway structure here in the foreground is an interesting temporary structure. You got some long accommodation brows leading up to a little trestled platform. Next up, we've got block and tackle out here and some, looks like volunteers, although it might be maintenance staff, getting the gangway in place. You can also see some bricks being laid on the pier in the upper left-hand corner. So the ship arrives before the pier is complete. The next picture, you get the gangway from the other side. So I don't see how Jack could have been the I don't see how Mr. Hoban could have been the photographer of both of these pictures, since one is on the ship, one is off the ship, unless there are multiple gangways set up at this point. In the next picture, we've got a crane lifting the gangway into place. Next picture is more of this crane, more of the crane. These do not appear to be scanned in chronological order. The next picture is the ship being moved into her current berth. When the ship was first brought here, she went first to the Philadelphia Navy Yard because she was brought in before the location of the museum had been chosen. So was it going to be up in the Bayonne area near Liberty State Park? Was it going to be down here in Camden? So she went to Philadelphia first. Then she went over to the Broad Street terminal here in Camden, which was an active marine terminal. While they had found out that Camden had gotten the ship, they didn't have the facilities in place, so the new museum building, the new pier were still being built. So then it wasn't until October of 2001 that the ship gets moved into her present berth, which I believe is what we're seeing with these tugboats here. In the next picture, you can see the gangway in the river. You can see a tugboat pushing the ship in. And then we come to some electrical control equipment and I believe an air conditioning space on the ship. It's an interesting collection in that there are some just general pictures of the ship mixed in with other stuff. I don't believe any maintenance work has been done in here, so it's more documenting how the space looked when we got it and less what work has been done there. In our next picture, you can see that everything's been taped over and papered over in one of the 5-inch magazines. So this is most likely the volunteers about to spray paint in there and not the way we got the ship as a museum. Our next picture, so this is the ship's store on board. Looks like it is being used as the ship's store. The original Navy fittings in there were gutted at some point between when this picture was taken and when I started working here. So this is some of the only photography we have of what the store looked like when we first got the ship, which would be original 1980s equipment, plus our own modern point-of-sale system in there. Our next picture, a couple of the early volunteers. There's a good shot of the deck, and you can see how bad it looks when we got the ship. And it's just one of those projects that's taken years to get the money to fix. Next picture, you can see some of the ship's boats we got. Next up, we've got the flag on the fantail. The wood back there has since been ripped up and not replaced, so it's very interesting seeing what the wood is like. It's the extreme stern of the ship near the flagpole, and we're definitely in our current berth because you can see the terminal behind us. All right, now we're down in one of the engine rooms at one of the power control panels. This also is probably just a condition picture and not any work being done down there. This is not one of the spaces that was opened up at the time. Our next picture is just the other side of that room. So it's interesting to see how well lit and the condition of the paint when we got the ship versus now, 20 some years later, where some of the paint in these spaces has chipped off or lighting has failed, because these are off the tour routes. We don't maintain all those light fixtures. Okay, and this is number 2 main engine, which I believe is engine room number 3. Don't get me started. The engine rooms and the engines themselves are not numbered in order. We've done a whole video on that. You can find that elsewhere on the channel. Libby might be able to find and put a link in the description below. I believe we have transitioned out of an engine room, and now I think we're in a gun pit underneath one of the 16-inch gun barrels. That might be the recoil cylinder I'm looking at. Yeah, so we're in the forward part of a 16-inch gun turret looking aft. That gray column we're looking at is the shell hoist. So this is the gun pit under one of the barrels. Now we're looking forward. That big screw there is the worm gear that elevates and depresses the barrel. The next picture, we've got the gun barrel from above, near where the powder bags come out. So you can see the counter battery cylinders on top, and the breech of the gun is closed. In our next picture, you can see the powder car door. So these are all status pictures of one of the gun pits. Possibly after our volunteers painted it, possibly as we got it from the Navy. Maybe we'll get more information on that as we flip through. Okay, in this next picture, we can see that a group of volunteers has managed to use a chainsaw to get the breech open so that you can see inside. And this gentleman in the blue jumpsuit on the left, who has his hand on something. I believe that thing he has his hand on is the spanner tray for loading the shell and powder bag. And behind the chain, you can see repeat written on the gun, which means this is the center barrel of turret number 1. In the next picture, there they are standing under the center barrel of turret 1. So here's a couple of volunteers. In our next picture, same group of guys. Again, another good shot of the deck up forward there. You can see some of the discolored wood. Next picture, not sure what's happening here. Looks like a volunteer has thrown something overboard. The museum's official staff policy is we are not allowed to throw things overboard. Maybe this is the thing that happened that required that policy to be written. Another picture of the volunteers in front of the gun. The radio room up on the main deck. So this might be showing it after it's been repainted. Partial equipment restored in there. Here's a close-up of one of the machines in there, and then looking at some of the equipment on the other side of the room. So all this is main deck radio. Here you are looking back at the aft end of that space. This is on the aft bulkhead of that space in radio. And then we've got one of the early exhibits. This exhibit is still installed more or less unchanged. You can see that when you come on board today. It's dedicated to sailor's life on board the ship, and is showing a crossing the line ceremony. On the next picture, you can see a group of our volunteers here in the first class mess, which is our volunteer lounge. Another picture of that room from the other side. Ooh, here's a picture of the armored box launcher for our Tomahawk after it's first been elevated. Volunteers in first class mess. Volunteer outside of a 5-inch gun. This looks like Mount 56 if I had to guess. Volunteers on the mess decks, volunteers on the mess decks. Not quite sure what this space is that they're chipping preparatory to painting, but you can see an air handler unit there partially disassembled. The right-hand side, you can see the angle of the hull. So this is one of the angled areas. This maybe one of the forward berthing spaces on second deck. Got somebody up on the O5 level of the bridge, maybe installing some of the original radio antennas that go around there. This is the captain's office. Looks like they're doing some painting work in there. Next up, picture of the fantail. You can see, looking at the deck here, that the wood has already been ripped up by the time the museum gets to the ship. The wood on the fantail was so badly rotten that it seems like they tore it up while the ship was in mothballs. And it was only last year that we redecked this area after 20 some odd years without it. So this photo series is really cool for me, seeing the amount of work they did in the first year of the museum's operations. And it's really, really disappointing for me seeing how little we've been able to add since then. They did so much work early on getting stuff ready that we've basically coasted on it all this time. It was only after 19 years that we got around to redecking the ship. It was only after 18 years that we got around to making the radar antenna rotate that they got installed on there. They were able to find 8 harpoon canisters to put on the starboard side. We've never found another 8 for the port side. All of these things I assumed were done over a number of years early on in the museum's career until I started working here. But it seems like they were all done within a relatively short window right at the beginning. And that's really depressing for me to think of, especially given all of the money and personnel that the museum had for the first several years that it was in operation. They didn't do more. Because like many museums, after the first 5 years, everybody who was interested in us early on had already come out and visited us. So visitation really dropped off. So revenue dropped off. And so the amount of staff here dropped off. And it seems like a lot of projects were just left undone for almost 15 years. And of course, ships like this, you can't defer the maintenance or the workload becomes overwhelming. Like, it is incredible how much those volunteers were able to do in a year or two. Many of them are not with us anymore. They don't come out and volunteer. We are not able to do that level of work anymore. So what was the coolest thing you saw in here? Let us know in the comment section down below. Remember, you can keep sending pictures for consideration in future Pictures Worth 1,000 Words videos. There's a link in the description below to my Facebook page. If you head over there and send me the picture, it's a lot easier to send pictures on Facebook than it is to drop them in the YouTube comments. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate the support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to continue donating to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.